Caleb here, back again with more Red Knot. This time I have An Ice Cold Grave by Charlaine Harris. I'm probably totally mispronounced her name, but that's as good as we're gonna get. A little blurb here on the front. An unusual premise, a winning heroine, book list. So, the cover, it looks like it takes place in a snow-covered forest where there is some little red flags in the snow. There's a crow or raven or something there. I'm guessing because there's supposed to be bodies there or like a dead person around and it's a carrion bird. Anyway, there's a skull in around one of the flags. So, yeah, I like this cover. It's simple, but it gets the point across. Cold, graves, dead people. Yeah. So, flipping to the back. The voices of the dead become inescapable clues. Yeah, inescapable. For lightning struck sleuth Harper Connolly in this tale of murder and beyond, from New York Times best-selling author Charlaine Harris. Harper Connolly heads to Doraville, North Carolina, to find a missing boy, one of several teenage boys who have disappeared over the last 5 years, and all of them are calling for Harper. She finds them buried in the frozen ground. All Harper wants is to get out of town before she's caught in the media storm, until she herself is attacked. Soon Harper will learn more than she cared to about the dark, mysterious, and long-hidden secrets of Doraville. Knowledge of the dead that makes her the next in line to end up in an ice-cold grave. Title drop! Fans of paranormal mysteries will snap this up. Library Journal. Every series Charlaine Harris creates is utterly fantastic. We'll see about this. Midwest Book Review. Title page. Dedication. Acknowledgements. The eastern seaboard is crammed with dead people. When work brings me to that part of America, the whole time I'm there, it's like wings of a huge flock of birds are fluttering inside my brain, never coming to rest. That gets old pretty quick. But I had some jobs in the east, so I was there. So here I was, driving through South Carolina with my sort of brother Tolliver in the passenger seat. He was sleeping now, and I glanced over at him, smiling because he couldn't see me, and it was okay to smile at him. Tolliver has hair as dark as mine, and if we didn't run and spend quite a bit of time outdoors, we'd both be pale, and we're both on the thin side. Other than that, we're quite different. Tolliver's dad never took him to a skin doctor when Tolliver was a teen, and his cheeks are scarred from acne. His eyes are darker than my murky gray ones, and his cheekbones are high. When my mother married his dad, it was a case of two yuppies joining together in the hurtling path down the drain. My mother was dead now, and Tolliver's father was somewhere, who knew where. Why is that a question? You're stating that. You're not asking me where your father is, or your stepdad in this case. He'd gotten out of jail the previous year. My dad was still in for embezzling and a few other white-collared crimes. A bunch of wonderful people, I'm sure. We never talked about them. If you have to be in South Carolina, it's beautiful in the late spring and the early summer. Unfortunately, we were nearly at the end of an especially nasty January. The ground was cold and gray and slushy from the melt of the previous snow, and there was more predicted in a few days. I was driving very carefully because traffic was heavy and the road was not clear. We'd come up from mild and sunny Charleston. A couple there had decided their house was uninhabitable due to ghost activity, and they'd called me in to find out if there were any bodies in the walls or flooring. The answer was clear, no. There were bodies in the narrow backyard. There were 3 of them, all babies. I didn't know what that meant. They died so soon after birth that they hadn't had much consciousness for me to tap into, so I hadn't been able to name the cause of death, which is usually quite clear. But the Charleston homeowners had been thrilled with the results, especially after an archaeologist dug up the meager remains of the tiny bodies. They would dine out on the dead babies for the next decade. They'd handed me a check without hesitation. That's kind of a poor way to put it. They would dine on the dead babies. That's not always the case. Tolliver said, "Where you want to stop to eat?" I glanced over. He wasn't fully awake. He reached over to pat my shoulder. "You tired?" he asked. "I'm okay. We're about 30 miles outside Spartanburg. Too far? Sounds good. Cracker Barrel? You must want some vegetables." "Yeah, you know what I look forward to. If we really do buy that house we talk about, cooking for ourselves." That's not a really good sentence, but I understand it. "We do okay when we're at home," I agreed. We had bought a few cookbooks at second-hand bookstores. We picked very simple recipes. Our apartment in St. Louis was hanging in the balance right now. We spent so much time on the road that it was very nearly a waste of money. But we needed a home base, somewhere to collect our mail, a place to call home when we weren't driving around the United States. We'd been saving up to buy a house, probably somewhere in the Dallas area, so we'd be close to our aunt and her husband. They had custody of our 2 little sisters. We spotted the restaurant sign we'd been looking for after about 20 miles, and I pulled off the interstate. Though it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the parking lot was crowded. I tried not to grimace. Tolliver just loved Cracker Barrel. He didn't mind wading through all the kitsch in the store part of the building. So after we parked about half a mile away, we slogged through the slush past the rocking chairs on the porch, stamping our feet on the mat so we wouldn't track the icy mess inside. The restrooms were clean, and the place was warm. I can't tell if that's an error in my book or a hole, but there looks like a star at the end of was. We were seated almost immediately. "Wait, how? You said the place was crowded. That kind of shit takes forever." And the waitress, a very young woman with hair as straight as a horse's tail, was delighted to serve us. Well, Tolliver. Waitresses, barmaids. Barmaids? Are they still called barmaids? That seems a little old-fashioned to me, but again, I don't, go to bars and stuff, so I don't know. Maids in hotels, serving women loved Tolliver. We ordered, and while I was simply enjoying not being in a moving vehicle, Tolliver was thinking about the next job. "It's a law enforcement invitation," he warned me. That meant less money, but good buzz. We always wanted law enforcement professionals to give us good recommendation. After half the referrals we got came from detectives, sheriff, deputies, and so on. Though they might not believe in me, there'd be pressure on them from somewhere about a particular investigation, and they'd call me in, having heard about me through the law enforcement grapevine. Maybe there was someone influential they wanted to get off their back. Maybe they were stumped about finding someone, or they'd exhausted just about every venue in their search for a missing person. The law didn't pay well, but it paid off. What do they want me to do, cemetery or the search? Search. That meant I'd have to go looking for the body. The jobs I got were about 50-50, since the lightning had snaked through the window of our trailer and... Oh my God, this is going to be amazing for me to pronounce. Texarkana. When I was 15, I'd been able to locate corpses. If the body was in its proper grave in the cemetery, the people who hired me wanted to know the cause of death. If the body was in an unknown location, I could track it. If the search was limited in scope, luckily the buzz given off by a corpse was less intense as the corpse aged. Or Ida. Really? You're going to be like Ida? No, seriously, that's what it says. That's not me. That's not my southern twang coming in and making me mispronounce words. That's actually what's written here. I apostrophe D-A. Ida. Unless your character is speaking with an accent, you don't need to put the accent in the description part of the story. I don't care that it's in first person and this is her thinking shit. She's narrating. You don't put that in anything other than dialogue boxes. Everything else needs to be written normally. Unless the character specifically has dialogue that they are speaking to another character and they happen to have an accent. I'd have been batshit crazy by now. Think about it. Caveman corpses, Native American corpses, the early settlers, the more recently deceased, that's a lot of dead people. And they all let me know where their earthly remains were interred. I wondered if it would be worthwhile sending my little brochure to archaeological digs and how Tolliver would go about collecting the address information for such a mailing. Tolliver was much better with her laptop than I was, simply because he was more interested. It wasn't like he was my servant or anything, even though I'm treating him like one. He's a shit-paid employee, I guarantee you that. He was the first person I told about my strange ability, after I recovered from the physical effects of the lightning strike. Though at first he hadn't believed me, he'd been willing to humor me by testing what I could and couldn't do, as we worked out the limitations of my odd new power. He'd become a believer. By the time I graduated from high school, we had our plan all worked out, and we hit the road. At first, we just traveled on weekends. Tolliver had to work a regular job, too, and I'd picked up money by working in fast food places. But after 2 years, we'd been able to quit the day job. We'd been on the road together ever since. At the moment, Tolliver was playing the peg game that's always on the table at Cracker Barrel. His face looked serious and calm. He didn't look like he was suffering, but he never did. I knew Tolliver had been having a painful time since the discovery that a woman who'd been pursuing him had. You couldn't find a better way in the next few sentences. You had to use had twice. I mean, it's okay if there's really no way around it to use a word twice to get your point. But it should be few and far between. It should be very few and far between. Why? Because it's off-putting and it makes the reader stop. And they have to think if that's correct or not, because it will confuse the fuck out of them. Because it is a rare occurrence when that is actually used. And you'll never hear it in conversation because that's not how people talk. That's not how people think about things. That's like suddenly throwing in used to could. I'd never thought there was any purpose or reason for used to could until somebody was asking me something about my father, and it just came into my mind. Well, he used to could do that. And I'm like, wait, I found a legitimate use for used to could. But nobody actually talks like that. So don't do it. It's annoying. Had an ulterior motive. Even when you're not crazy about someone, even when in fact you're a little repelled by that person, that's got to sting. Tolliver hadn't talked about Memphis much, but it had left its mark on us both. On the both of us. I watched his long white fingers moving, lost in my own sad place. Things hadn't been as easy between us in the past few weeks. It was my fault. All my fault. The waitress came by to ask if we needed refills on our drinks, managing to smile a little more brightly at Tulliver than me. "Where y'all goin'?" she asked brightly. "Asheville area," Tulliver said, glancing up from the game. "Oh, it's beautiful there," she said, doing her bit for the tourist board. He gave her an absent smile and bent back over the pegboard. She gave his downturned head a philosophical shrug, and hustled off. You're staring a hole in me," Tulliver said, without looking up. "You're just in my line of sight," I said. I leaned on my elbow. Where the hell was the food? I folded the paper band that had been around the napkin-rolled tableware. "Your leg hurtin'?" I asked. I had a weak right leg. Oh, he asked. I had a weak right leg. "Yeah, a little. Want me to I fell at words. "Massage it tonight?" "No." He looked up then. He raised his eyebrow. Of course I wanted him to massage my leg. I just didn't know if that would work out. I might do something wrong. Wrong for us? Are we in an incestuous relationship with our brother? I'm okay with this, but some people might not be. Just saying. "I think maybe I'll just put some heat on it tonight," I said. I excused myself and went to the ladies' room, which was filled with a mother and her 3 daughters. Oh, dear God. Or maybe her daughter had some friends along. They were very young and very loud, and the minute I could get into a stall I closed the door and pushed the bolt. I stood there for a moment, leaning my head against the wall. Shame and fear in equal amounts clogged my throat, and for a second I couldn't breathe. Then I gasped in a long, shuddering breath. "Mama, I think that lady's crying," said a child's penetrating voice. Oh, well, of course, if she's screaming at the top of her lungs, that's not as cute and sweet as I thought it was going to be. "Shh," said the mother. "Then we'll just leave her alone." And then there was blessed silence. I actually did have to use the bathroom, and my leg actually was hurting. I eased down. I don't need to know this. But I'm getting this, but I don't need to know this. I eased down my jeans, rubbing the tight leg after I sat down. There was a faint red spiderweb pattern above my right knee, extending to my upper thigh. I'd had my right side to the window when the lightning came in. When I rejoined Tulliver, the food had come, and I was able to keep busy eating. When we went out to the car, Tulliver slid into the driver's seat. It was his turn. I suggested a book on tape at the last second-hand bookstore we'd visited. I'd gotten 3. Unabridged, of course. I popped in a Dana Stabenow novel, leaned back, and walled my brother off. No, I wasn't walling him off. I was walling in myself. Tulliver had booked one room in the motel in Doraville. At the desk, I could see that he was waiting for me to tell him to ask for another one, since I'd been acting so standoffish. We'd often share a room in the past few years of traveling together. At first, we hadn't had enough money for 2 rooms. Later, sometimes we wanted our privacy, and sometimes we didn't care. It had never been an issue. I wouldn't let it be an issue now, I decided recklessly. I didn't know how long we could trudge on down this dreary road without Tulliver blowing up and demanding an explanation I couldn't give him. So we'd room together, and I'd just have to be uncomfortable in silence. I was getting used to that. We took our bags. I always took the bed closest to the room. He got the one by the window. It was a variation on the same room we'd seen over and over again. Slick polyester bedspreads, mass-produced chairs and table, television, beige bathroom. Tulliver got busy on his cell phone while I stretched out on the bed and turned on CNN. "She wants us to come by 8 tomorrow morning," he said, getting a pencil out of his bag and folding the morning's newspaper open to the crossword puzzle. Sooner or later he'd break down and learn how to work Sudoku, but he was sticking with his crosswords pretty faithfully. "Then I better run now," I said, and I noticed he didn't move for a few seconds, his pencil poised over the puzzle. We often ran together, though Tolliver usually took off toward the end of our exercise so he could go full out. It'd be too cold in the morning, even if I get up at 5. "You okay with running alone?" "Yeah, no problem." I got out my running gear and took off my jeans and sweater. I kept my back to him, but that was normal. While not having any modesty fetish, we tried to keep a boundary there. After all, we were brother and sister. "No, you're not," I said to my bad self. "He's really not related to you at all." I stuck a room key in my pocket and went outside into the cold, wet air and run off my unhappiness. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put up an incest warning. Like I said, I'm fine with that kind of thing in a story, but I know some people aren't. "I'm the sheriff of Knott County," the lean woman said. She was leaning out. Okay, look. If you use lean, and then in the next sentence, leaning, you need a different word. Change lean to skinny, to slim, to anything other than not leaning if a word coming up soon is going to be leaning. Just saying. "I'm the sheriff of Knott County," the lean woman said. She was leaning over the counter that divided the front of the station from the back, and she'd been chatting with the dispatcher when we entered. I've never understood how law enforcement people can stand to carry so much equipment around their hips, and this woman was bearing the full complement, too. I never liked to stare long enough to identify all the items. I had a brief relationship with the deputy, and I should have taken a moment then to examine his cop equipment. If you know what I mean, wink wink nudge nudge. I'd been more involved with his other equipment, I guess. When the sheriff straightened, I saw she was a tall woman. She was in her 50s with graying brown hair and a comfortable set of wrinkles at the corners of her eyes and mouth. She didn't look like any true believer I'd ever encountered, yet she was the one who'd email us. "I'm Harper Connolly," I said. "This is my brother, Tolliver Lang." We weren't what she'd expected either. She gave me a scan up and down. "You don't look like a dingbat," she said. "You don't look like a prejudiced stereotype," I said. This bachelor sucked in her breath. Uh-oh. Tolliver was right behind me, slightly to my left, and I felt nothing but a calm waiting coming from him. He always You're really gonna get to a fight with the chief of police at a police station? Really? There's cops all over that place. You two ain't fighting nobody. He always had my back. "Come into my office, we'll talk," said the tall woman. "My name is Sandra Rockwell, and I've been sheriff for 1 year. Sheriffs are elected in North Carolina." "Okay, I didn't know that." I didn't know how long her term was, but if she'd only been a sheriff a year, she must have plenty to go. Politics might not be as urgent a consideration for Sheriff Rockwell as they would be during election year. We were in her office by then. It wasn't very big, and it was decorated with pictures of the governor, a state flag, a U.S. flag, and some framed certificates. The only personal thing on Sheriff Rockwell's desk was of those clear cubes you can fill with pictures. Her cube was full of shots of the same 2 boys. They were both brown-haired like their mother. One of them, grown, had a wife and child of his own. Nice. The other one had a hunting dog. "Y'all want some coffee?" she asked as she slid into the swivel chair behind the ugly metal desk. I looked at Tolliver, and we both shook our heads. "Well, then," she said, put her hands flat on the desk. I heard about you from a detective in Memphis. Young, her name is." I smiled. "You remember her, then? She's partnered with a guy named Lacey?" I nodded. "She seemed like a sensible person. She was no flake, and her clearance rate and reputation are impressive. That's the only reason I'm talking to you, you understand?" "Yes, I understand." She looked a little embarrassed. "Well, I know I'm sounding rude, and that's not my intention, but you have to understand this is not something I'd consider doing if you didn't have a track record. I'm not one of these people who listens to that John Edward, not the politician with an S, but the medium. And I'm not one of these who likes to have my palm read, or go to seances, or even read a horoscope. I fully understand," I said. Maybe my voice was even drier. Tolliver smiled. "We get that you have reservations," he said. She smiled back gratefully. That's it in a nutshell. I have reservations." "So you must be desperate," I said. She gave me an unfriendly look. "Yes," she admitted, since she had to. "Yes, we're desperate." "I'm not looking to back out," I said blandly. "I just want to know what I'm up against." She seemed to relax at my frankness. "Okay, then, cards on the table," she said. She took a deep breath. "For the past 5 years, boys have been going missing in this county. It's up to 6 boys now. When I say boys, I mean in the 14 to 18-year-old range. Now, kids that age are prone to run away, and they're prone to suicide, and they're prone to have fatal car accidents. And if we'd found them or heard from the runaways, we'd be okay with that. As okay as you can be." We nodded. "But these particular boys, it's just no one can believe they would run away. And in this time, surely some hunter or birdwatcher or hiker would have found a body or two if they'd killed themselves or met with some accident in the woods." "So you're thinking that they're buried somewhere?" "Yes, that's what I'm thinking. I'm sure they're still there somewhere." "Then let me ask you a few things," I said. Tolliver took out his pad and pencil. The sheriff looked surprised, as if the last thing she'd ever expected had been that I would ask her questions. "Okay, shoot," Sandra Rockwell said after a brief pause. Are there bodies of water in the county?" "Yes, there's Gunnery Pond and Pine Landing Lake, and several streams." "Have they been searched?" "Yes, a couple of us dive, and we've searched as well as we can. Nothing's come to the surface either. Both of those spots are well used, and anything that came up and a lot of things that went down would have been found, if they'd been there to find. And I'm sure the pond's clear. Still, it's possible that there's something in the deepest part of the lake." The sheriff clearly believed that wasn't likely. "What do the missing boys have in common, besides their age range?" "Not much, except that they're gone." "All white?" "Oh, yes." "All go to the same school?" "No, 4 of them to the local high school, 1 of them to junior high, 1 of them to the private academy, Randolph Prep." "The last 5 years, you said? Do they vanish at the same time of year?" She looked at a file on her desk, opened it. Flipping over a few pages. "No," she said. 2 in the fall, 3 in the spring, and 1 in summer. None in the winter. The conditions would be worse for an outdoor internment. So she was probably right. The boys were buried somewhere. "You think the same person killed them all?" I said. I was guessing, but it was a good guess. "Yes," she said. "That's what I think." It was my turn to take a deep breath. I'd never handled anything like this. I'd never tried to find so many people. "I don't know a lot about serial killers," I said, and the 2 dreaded words dropped into the room like unwelcome visitors. But from what I read and seen on television, I believe they tend to bury their victims in the same geographical conditions, if not in the exact same location, like the Green River Killer dumping most of his victims in the river. "That's true," she said. "Some of them prefer the same location. They can visit it over and over to remember she'd done her homework." "How do you think I can help? Tell me how you work. How do you find bodies?" My sister does two things, Tolliver said, launching into his familiar spiel. She can find bodies, and she can determine the cause of death. If we have to search for a body, obviously that's going to take longer than someone taking her to the local cemetery, pointing to a grave, and wanting to know what killed the person in the grave. The sheriff nodded. It costs more. Yes, Tolliver said. There was no way to dress that up and make it prettier, so he didn't. Sheriff Rockwell didn't flinch or try to make us feel guilty about earning a living, as some people did. They acted like we were ambulance chasers. Well, let's face it, unless you're the real deal, and most of them aren't, that's pretty much what they are. They're just trying to con people out of their money. This was all I could do, my sole unique ability, and I was determined to bank as much money as I could while it was still operative. Some day, as quickly as it had been given to me, it might be taken away. I imagined I would be glad, but I would also be unemployed. How do you decide where to look? The sheriff asked. We get as much information as we can. What did you find after the disappearances? Tolliver asked. Any physical clues? The sheriff very sensibly got out a map of the county. After she spread it out over her desk, we all three rose to peer at it. Here we are, she said. Here's Doraville. It's the county seat. This is a poor county, rural. We're in the foothills, as you see. There's some hilly land, there's some steep land, and there's a valley or two with some level acres. We nodded. Doraville itself was a town strewn about on many levels. 3 of them had vehicles of their own, Sheriff Rockwell said. We found Chester Caldwell's old pickup here, in the parking lot at the head of the hiking trail. He was the first one? I asked. Yes, he was the first one. Her face tightened all over. I was a deputy then. We searched all along that trail for hours and hours. It goes through some steep terrain, and we looked for signs of a fall or an animal attack. We found nothing. He's gone missing after football practice in the middle of September. That was when Abe Madden was sheriff. She shook her head, trying to shake the bad memories out of it. We never found anything. He came from a tough home. Mom drinks too much, divorced. His dad was gone and stayed gone. She took a deep breath. Next was Tyler Webb, who was 16. He went missing on a Saturday after swimming with friends at Grunville Pond, a summer afternoon. We found his car here at the rest stop off the interstate. She pointed to a spot which wasn't too far, as the crow flies, west of Doraville. About as far as the trailhead parking lot was north Doraville. About as far as the trailhead was, yeah. Tyler's stuff was in the car, his driver's license, his towel, his t-shirt, but no one ever saw him again. No other fingerprints? No. A few of Tyler's, a few of his friends, and that's all. None on the wheel or door handle. They were clean. Weren't you wondering by then? I was, she said. Sheriff Madden wasn't. She shrugged. It was pretty easy to believe Chester had run off, though leaving his pickup behind. I didn't think so, but he had a tough time at home. He'd broken up with his girlfriend, and he wasn't doing well in school, so maybe he was a suicide, and we simply hadn't found his body. We looked, God knows. Abe figured someone would come across his remains eventually, but Tyler was a whole different kettle of fish. He had a very close family, real devout boy, one of the solid kids. There just didn't seem to be any way he would run off or kill himself, or anything like that. Just because everything is going well in somebody's life doesn't mean they're not suicidal. You can still have horrible mental issues, but everything in your life is fantastic. Everything in your life could be absolute shit, but you're perfectly sane. And happy-go-lucky. That's not really... it helps, but it's not a for sure sign of anything. By then Abe wouldn't hear a word on the subject. He found out he had heart problem by then, and he didn't want to upset himself. There was a little moment of silence. Then, I said, then Dillon Laster. Last year? Dillon didn't have a car. He told his grandmother he was going to walk over 3 streets to see a friend, but he never got there. A ball cap that might have been his was found here. She pointed a finger to a spot on the map. That's Shady Grove Cemetery, she said. Okay, a message, I said. Maybe the wind blew it there. Maybe it wasn't even his. Though the hair looked like Dillon's, it was just a Tar Heels cap. Eventually we sent it to SBI, and the DNA was a match for Dillon's. But it didn't do us much good to know that. It just meant wherever he was, he didn't have his hat. This was certainly the chronology of a botched investigation. I was no cop and would never be one, but I thought Abe Madden had something for which to answer. Hunter Fenwick, a month later, Rockwell said. Hunter was the son of a friend of mine, and he's the reason I ran for sheriff. I respected Sheriff Madden up to a point, but I knew he was wrong about these missing boys. Hunter, well, his car was parked the same place Chester's pickup was found, at the trailhead, and there was a little blood inside, not enough to be able to say for sure that he couldn't have survived losing it, and his wallet was found not a half-mile out of town, in a ditch off the road. She pointed to a meandering county road that led northwest out of Doraville for about 20 miles before heading north and then northeast to the next town, up in the mountains. Who's next? Tolliver asked, because the sheriff was getting lost in her own dark thoughts. The youngest, Aaron Robinson, junior high, 14, too young to drive alone. He stayed at the school to shoot some hoops one afternoon after basketball practice. He always walked home, but we'd had the time changed the night before, and it was dark. He never made it to his house. His backpack was never found. No other trace of him. She pulled a sheet of opaque plastic back from a standing corkboard at one side of her desk. We looked at a row of young faces. Underneath each face was a date of the boy's disappearance. Hearing about it was hard, but seeing their faces was harder. We all kept a moment of silence. Then Tolliver said, The last one was 3 months ago. Jeff McGraw. It was because of his grandmother that we called you in. Twyla didn't think we were getting anywhere, and she was right. What's wrong, J.C.? I galled the sheriff to say that, but she said it. Oh, it galled the sheriff to say that, but she said it. Twyla Cotton donated a lot of money and raised some more from the families, the ones that could help. And she got some money from some people who just want this to stop. People not related to the missing boys in any way. Sandra Rockwell shook her head. I never seen anything like the time and energy she put into this, but Jeff was her oldest grandson. Her attention strayed from us to the cube of pictures on her desk. Rockwell was a grandmother, too. Her gaze shifted to the last photograph in the row of faces. A boy with freckles, reddish-brown hair, a school sports jacket. Jeff McGraw had lettered in basketball and football. I was willing to bet he'd been a local hero in Doraville. I knew my southern towns. So you're like the front man for this consortium of local people who've donated money to find the boys, Tolliver said. Since the county, I'm guessing, didn't have the money. Yes, Sheriff Rockwell said. We wouldn't spend county money on you, or state money. Had to be private. But I wouldn't have you here unless they let me interview you. And I'm ambivalent about the whole thing. Whoa, big words from the sheriff in more ways than one. I'd never heard of law enforcement professional admit to being doubtful about a course of action involving me. An angry, disapproving, disgusted, yes. Doubtful, no. I can see how you would be, I said cautiously. I know you've done your best, and it must be, galling to be asked to call someone like me. I'm sorry about that, but I swear I'll give it my best shot, and I swear I'm not a fraud. You better not be, Senator Rockwell said. And now I've arranged for you to meet with Twyla Cotton. It only seemed right, after that. We'll pick the place you start the search. Okay, I said, and that was that. Twyla Cotton was a very heavy woman. You read about fat people who walked very lightly. She wasn't one of them. She walked ponderously. She answered the door so quickly I feared she'd been standing right inside, since we called her to tell her we were on our way from the sheriff's department. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt that read, "Number 1 Grandma." Her face was bare of makeup, and her short dark hair had only a few threads of gray. I put her in her mid-50s. After shaking her hands, she led the way through the house. She didn't match the decor. Some designer had worked here, but the result was very pretty. Lots of peaches and creams and beige in the formal living room, dark blues and chocolate browns in the family room, but not very personal. The kitchen was Twyla's natural domain, and that was where she led us. It was full of exposed bricks, stainless steel, and gleaming surfaces. It was warm and cozy after the chill gray of the morning. It was the homiest room in the house. I was Archie Cotton's cook, she said. She smiled at me as if she'd been reading my mind. I had a white-collar upbringing for my first decade, but after my parents had descended pretty quickly through blue-collar and down below, you could say I was Medley. It had been a case of riches to rags. Twyla Cotton had gone the better way, the rags to riches way. And then I married you, I said. Yep, we got married. Have a seat, hon. Oh, and then he married you, I said. Yep, we got married. Have a seat, hon, she said to Tolliver, and she pointed at a chair for me. There was also a formal dining room, but this gleaming round table was positioned in a bay window at one end of the kitchen, and the chairs were wide, comfortable rolling chairs. There was a newspaper and a few magazines, a little pile of bills handy to the most convenient chair. Tolliver and I both knew not to pick that one. Can I get you all a cup of coffee, some coffee cake? Our hostess asked. I'd like some coffee if it's already made, Tolliver said. Me too, please. Me too, please, I said. I sank into a chair and rolled up under the table. In short order, we had mugs of coffee, spoons, napkins, and cream and sugar close to hand. It was very good coffee. The morning improved just a bit. Archie had some children, already grown and gone, Twyla said. They didn't come around as much after his wife died, but he was lonely, and I'd been working for him for years. It just came natural. Any hard feelings from his children? Tolliver asked. He gave 'em some money and quieted them down, Twyla said. He laid it out to them about the will, and who would get what, in front of 2 lawyers. Got 'em to sign papers saying they wouldn't contest the will if I survived him. So I got this house, and a good bit of cash, plus a lot of stock. Archie Jr. and Bitsy got their fair shake. They don't exactly love me, but they don't hate me either. So why did you want us here, Miss Cotton? I've got a friend you helped a couple of years ago, Linda Barnard in Kentucky. Wanted to know what happened to her little grandbaby, the one who was found a mile away from home, no marks on her. I remember. So I thought about calling you in, and Sandra researched y'all. Talked to some policewoman in Memphis. Jeff, your grandson. Is he your son's son? He's 16, Tolliver asked, trying to lead Talia. I'm sorry, I keep messing up this name because it's spelt weird. Twyla to the subject we'd come to discuss. Though almost everyone we looked for turned out to be dead, Tolliver and I had learned a long time ago to refer to the missing person in the present tense. It just sounded more respectful and more optimistic. He was 16. He He was the older boy of my son Parker. She had no hesitation in using the past tense. She read the question in our faces. I know he's dead, Twyla said, her round face rigid with grief. He would never run away, like the police say. He would never go this long without letting us hear. He's been gone 3 months, I asked. We already knew enough about Jeff McGraw, but I felt it would be indecent not to ask. Since October 20th. No one's heard from him? I knew the answer, but I had to ask. No, and he had no reason to go. He was already playing varsity football. He had a little girlfriend. He and his mom and Dad got along good. Parker McGraw, that was my last name before I married Archie. Parker loved that boy so much. He and Bethelyn have Carson, who's 12, but you can't replace any child, much less your firstborn. They're all broken up. You understand, I began carefully, then paused to try and find some other way of saying what I needed to say. You understand, I need some idea of where to search, or I might wander around this town forever without getting a location. The sheriff said she had an idea where we should start. America is so big, you never realize how big until you're looking for something the size of a corpse, or a needle in a haystack. Tell me how you work, she said. It was great to meet someone so matter-of-fact about it. If you have an area you think is more likely than any other, I just start walking around, I said. It may take time. It may take a lot of time. I may never be successful. She brushed that aside. How will you know it's him? Oh, I'll know. And I've seen his picture. The problem is, there are dead people everywhere. I have to sort through them. She looked astonished. After a thoughtful moment, she nodded again, not the reaction I was used to. If he's in any of the areas you pick for me to search, I'll find him. If he isn't, I'm not going to lie to you. I may never find Jeff. What have you got in terms of pinning his whereabouts down? His cell phone. It was found in the Madison Road. I can show you the exact spot. She showed me Jeff's picture, anyway. It wasn't the same one I'd seen at the police station. It was a posed studio picture of Jeff and his whole family, plus his grandmother. My heart used to break when I saw the image of them alive, cradled in the arms of their nearest and dearest. Now I just register the features, hoping I'll see them again, even if they're just scattered bones, because that's how I make our living. And it's also good not to, get involved in other people's personal stuff, because there's caring and doing your job, but then there's also doing your job because it's your job. That's a fine line doctors and nurses and all kinds of people walk, because they have to care enough to take care of you and to help you figure out what's wrong with you so you can better take care of yourself and overcome whatever is wrong with your body. But also it's just their job. And they don't care about you because you're not important to them. You're just part of their job. And some people don't get that. And even some of them, they can be too cold. It's a fine line somebody in a position like that has to walk. They have to care, but they can't care too much. If anybody gets what I'm saying. This particular gig in Doraville felt different. Time isn't much of a factor when you're dealing with the dead. They're not going to go anywhere. It's the living who are urgent. But in this case, time was important. If the sheriff was right, we were dealing with a serial killer who might snatch another boy at any moment. That his pattern didn't include winter, but who's to say his pattern wouldn't change? That he wouldn't take advantage of this slushy time between snows, plan a final spree before a hard freeze. I found myself hoping that if I were able to find the missing boys, then something about the way they were buried, something about the location, or what was buried with them, would lead to the discovery of the killer. I know better than anyone that death comes to us all. I hate the murders of the young, because they rob the world of a life that still held potential. This doesn't really make sense, I know. Even a dissolute alcoholic 75-year-old can push a woman out of the path of a speeding car and change a bit of the world forever, but the death of children always carries its own particular horror. Twyla Cotton had a Cadillac, only a year or two old. "I like a big car," she said. We nodded. We liked it too. We were bundled up for the weather, and Twyla looked like a ball of fudge in her dark brown coat. "Do your son and his wife know we're here and what we're doing?" I asked cautiously. "Parker and Bethelyn do know, but they don't believe it will lead to anything. They think I'm wasting my money. But they know it's my money to waste, and if it makes me feel better. I hope they were philosophical. Like, I know these words, but then I see them, and then I try to pronounce them, and then I get mad, and then that just makes it worse for me to try and pronounce them. Philosophical about it as Twyla made it sound. Families can give us an awful lot of trouble, which I guess isn't too surprising, since they usually believe we're defrauding their grieving relative. Still, we've had a bellyful of trouble in our lives, and we don't want any that we can avoid." I exchanged a glance with Tolliver, who was in the back seat, and one glance said all this between us. "Have you ever had a child, Harper?" Twyla asked. "No, I've never been pregnant," I said, "but I know how you feel. My sister has been missing for 8 years. I didn't normally tell people that. Of course, some of them already knew it. It had made a big splash in the papers when it happened, but I was a high school student then, not a whatever I was now." "You have other family?" I said, smiling brightly. "Well, I have Tolliver. I've got a half-brother, Mark, and 2 half-sisters, little ones, Mariella and Gracie. They live in Texas with our aunt and her husband. Mark wasn't my half-brother any more than Tolliver was. He was simply Tolliver's older brother, but it wasn't in the mood to spell it out. Oh, I'm so sorry. Your parents already passed?" "My mother passed. My father's still living. In jail, but living. Tolliver's mother had died before his father met my mom, and Tolliver's father was out of jail and drifting somewhere. Considering my mom and dad and Tolliver's father had all been attorneys, they'd had a long way to fall. They'd really thrown themselves into it. Apparently, because she's like, "Our parents suck ass. They're in jail and shit or dead." And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like crap. They were lawyers. What the fuck did they do? What in the flying Sam crap? Twyla looked a little shocked. "Well, how awful. I'm so sorry." I shrugged. That was just the way it was. "Thanks," I said, but I knew I didn't sound sincere. Couldn't help it. When I heard that my mother had died, I was sorry, but not surprised, and not unrelieved. We were quiet after that until we pulled up by the side of the road. Twyla glanced down at the list she'd taken down during a quick phone call with Sandra Rockwell. Sure enough, Sandra Rockwell had a prioritized list of places to check. This was place number 1. We were behind the high school, the football practice field, a stretch of barren, level ground. One of those devices that the boys push around was still sitting by the side of the field, though football season was over. The field house was closed and locked until next year. Basketball would be the sport to play now. "This is where his truck was," Twyla said. "We'd just gotten it for him. It was an old second-hand Dodge." Sheriff Rockwell had said less about Jeff than any of the other boys, perhaps because she'd known we'd be talking to his grandmother. Looking around now, I didn't see anyone, not a soul. So an abduction at this point wasn't out of the question, though risky. At any moment someone might come out of the school, but there weren't any houses nearby. The lane behind the practice field was just a bare strip of ground, before a steep hill that had been sheared away to build the school. Though it might be fair sport for an abduction, a fair spot for an abduction, I seriously doubted someone had killed the boy on the spot and buried him here. What I wanted to show, I was willing. But I wanted to show that I was willing. Yeah, there should be a that there. Well, not necessarily a that, but it would help. I stepped out, set out that part of me that made me unique. There was no response. I was getting the tiniest tingle, which meant some incredibly old human remains were somewhere in the area. It was a feeling I'd learned to ignore in my search for modern bodies, though the range would be almost the same, not enough to make a difference. I walked the length of the property and kept getting the same reading. I shook my head silently and climbed back into the Cadillac. We drove, Twyla pointing out this or that town landmark as we passed it. I didn't listen, concentrating instead on what I was picking up as we moved. The local cemetery provided a huge mass of static, but we had to stop there because that was where Tyler's hat had been found. Of course, there were tons of bodies there, and some of them were very fresh. It was way too cold to pull my shoes off, but I followed my instincts and went to the freshest graves. There was a heart attack. There was a death by old age. Sometimes, you just give out. Those were the most recent deaths, but Tyler Lester had been gone about 2 years. If I was remembering correctly, so I had to check out a lot more bodies. None of them turned out to be Tyler. They were all exactly who they were supposed to be according to their headstones. I was glad Doraville wasn't bigger, and glad some people were buried in the newer cemetery, which was south of Doraville. We were now on the western edge of town, and Twyla once more pulled to the side of the road. The man that lives here was arrested for attacking a boy, she said, pointing to a dilapidated white frame house, barely visible behind the tangle of vines and young trees. He's been questioned over and over. I wasn't getting anything from the car. I got out to look a couple of steps forward, closing my eyes. Picked up a buzz from my left, much farther back in the woods, but it was the faint buzz associated with old cemeteries. I heard Trolliver's window roll down. Ask her if there's an old church back there with its own cemetery, I said. Yes, Twilight called to me. Mount Orient is back there. I got back in the car. Nope. Twilight inhaled deeply as if about to play her last card. She put the car in drive and we pulled out, heading even further out of the small town of Doraville. We drove northwest, the readout on Twyla's car told me, and the ground began to climb. I looked up at the mountains, and I thought if Jeff's body were up there, I would never find it. I did not want to go hiking in those mountains, especially in this weather. I had a brief, selfish thought. Why couldn't Twyla have called me in 2 months ago, a month even? I shivered and thought of the biting cold, the snow that lay on the patches of the ground, the predictions of bad weather in a few days. We began to go up. There, through the pitch of the ground was not so steep here. And then Twyla stopped again. I noticed how stiffly she sat in the driver's seat, how white she'd gotten. This is where the phone was, Twyla said. She jerked her thumb to the right. I put that rock there to mark where it was exactly after the sheriff showed me. There was a big rock with a blue cross on it, dug into the earth at the side of the road. You put it in pretty deep, Tolliver said. The mowers had to pass over it, she said. That was 3 months ago. Practical. I got out of the Cadillac and looked around, pulling on my gloves as I did so. It was freaking cold up here, no doubt about it. The Madison Road rose steeply ahead of us, cut out of the rising mountains to the left. On our side there was a fairly level, narrow strip, perhaps half an acre to an acre of land, before the rolling slope began its rise. In the half-acre lay the site of an old home. The house had been abandoned years before. The plot wasn't in a neat rectangle because it followed the contours of the hill. It was long and thin in spots. We were parked on the shoulder, and if I took a step, I'd roll down the slope of a deep ditch. The driveway into the plot ran over a culvert so the flow of rainwater wouldn't be impeded. The remains of the driveway passed through the remains of a fence. Now, with all the leaves fallen, the strands of weeds were golden or brown with winter's death, and the occasional young pine looked sparkling green. The weeds and small trees appeared to be holding up the fence. The house had been a humble one. The roof wasn't caved in, but there were holes in it, and the porch was sagging. There wasn't any glass in the windows. There was a listing two-car garage off to one side, with wide doors that hung ajar. Once it had been painted white, like the house. The whole thing was Southern Gothic, picturesque decay personified. The water in the drainage ditch was dark and would be very cold. There'd been a lot of rain the past couple of weeks, and I felt the raw chill of more rain coming. I could tell from the inclination of Tolliver's head that he expected me to walk down the side of the road to where the hill leveled into the valley. He expected that someone had dumped the body on the more accessible ground and had tossed its accessories off while driving upward into the mountains, and under other circumstances that's exactly what I would have done, but there wasn't any need. The minute my foot touched the ground, I'd known I was going to have news for Twyla Cotton. The buzzing was intense, increasing as I stepped closer to the eroded driveway. This was not a signal from a single corpse. I began to have a bad feeling, an awful feeling, and I was scared to look at Tolliver. He took my hand, wrapped it around the crook of his elbow. He could tell I'd decided to go into the tangled area that had been a yard of the old house. The ground is rough in there. I wish we'd worn our high boots, he said. But I couldn't register what he was saying. I watched the blue pickup pass, slowing down for the curve, fading away from view. It was the only other vehicle we'd seen on this road. After the sound of its motor died away, I could only hear the increasing irrelevant registers of the two live people and the increasingly more compelling signals of the dead. I walked forward, pulling Tolliver with me. Maybe he tried to pull me back a little, but I kept on going, because this was my moment, my connection with the power, or ability, or electrical short that made me unique. "You better get the flags," I said, and he went back to get the lengths of wire topped with red plastic flags. In the cold damp, I stood in the middle of the front former yard, between the fence and the ruined house. I turned in a circle, feeling the buzzing rising all around me. As they clamored to be found, that's all they want, you know. They want to be found. I tried to speak, choked, gasped. "What's wrong?" Tolliver asked distantly. "Harper?" I stumbled to the left a couple of steps. "Here," I said. "My grandson, Jeff's here?" "Jeff's there." Twyla had forged her way onto the property. I moved 6 feet northwest. "Here, too," I said. "He's in pieces?" "There's more than one body," Tolliver told her. I held my hand up to sharpen my focus. I turned again, more slowly. My eyes closed, my hands raised, counting. 8, I said. "Oh, my Lord in heaven," Twyla said. She sat down heavily on an old stump. "I'm going to call the police." She must have given Tolliver a glance of sudden misgiving, because he said, "You can bank on it, Harper's right." I heard the little beeps as she began punching in numbers. "What happened to them?" he asked me quietly. He knew I was listening, though my eyes were so closed. I didn't say anything. It was time for me to find out, but I didn't want anyone else to watch while I did it. "Okay," I said to steady myself. "Tolliver?" I wanted him to be ready. "I'm here," he said. "I've got a hold." I could feel his grip on my arms. I stepped directly onto the ground above the corpse, and I looked down through the soil and rocks. Caught a glimpse of hell. That was the last thing I remember. Hell yeah, I'm gonna keep reading this, because I want to know what fucking happens. Like, what the fuck killed these kids? So, yeah, I like this book. It's an easy to get into. There's some questionable grammar choices in writing characters with Southern heritage twangs and whatnot, but I have no complaints. Kind of slow, but it's not so slow I want to be like, get on with it. So that would really be my only 2 complaints about the book so far. The incest, that's not quite incest, that's still sort of incest, might throw people off. But aside from it being mentioned 3 times, just so you get a feeling for how she feels about it, and and that an interest is there, so you get to know a little more about her relationship with her brother, and that she'd want to be more than a sister to him. That could be off-putting to some, but it's not so in your face that you want to stab somebody because of it. It's the right mix of, here's what you need to know, here's what you need to know about the characters, here's the characters' personalities, and here's the case. And so let's go right into the case. And by the end of chapter 3, we're doing something. Something is happening, and we're investigating. I like that. This is how you pace a book. Or at least one that I will like. So, to quickly recap, I like the book. Some weird grammar choices, but okay. The incest is fine. I don't care about it, and it's not driven down your throat, so it's something you could, at least as far as 3 chapters go, something you can overlook. It's not the main focus of the story. It's just something that is part of the characters themselves. And I think it's paced pretty well, and it didn't make me want to yell and scream like usual. Only thing is the grammar is what throws me. The poor use of grammar several times. Like, what? I bitched about it 3 times in 3 chapters. So, yeah. Charlene Harris and Ice Cold Grave. Good book. Pick it up. If I can find any other books by her, I will grab them and I will read them. And hopefully they will be a good time, just like this. I'm Caleb. This has been Red Knot. Thank you for listening. Bye!